The turbulence hit Flight 2847 like an invisible fist, sending coffee cascading across tray tables and drawing sharp gasps from the 312 passengers crammed into the Boeing 777. Chen pressed her forehead against the cool window in seat 34F, watching lightning fork through the storm clouds below. Her fingers traced the worn leather cover of the journal in her lap, a habit she'd developed during countless flights over the past 15 years. The same journal that had accompanied her through 3 continents, 7 countries, and more classified missions than she cared to count. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. But today, she was nobody. Just another passenger in economy, wedged between a snoring businessman and a college student whose earbuds leaked tinny pop music. Her gray wool sweater was deliberately unremarkable, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No one would look twice at the petite Asian woman clutching a cup of lukewarm tea, and that was exactly how she preferred it. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Oxygen masks tumbled from their compartments like yellow flowers blooming in reverse. Maya's training kicked in: assess, prioritize, protect, but she forced herself to remain still, to let her carefully constructed anonymity hold. Around her, passengers fumbled with the masks, some crying, others praying in languages that painted the cabin with a mosaic of human fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez." The pilot's voice cut through the chaos, steady but strained. "We're experiencing severe weather conditions and have been rerouted to Denver International Airport for an emergency landing. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." Maya's stomach clenched, not from the turbulence but from recognition. Captain Elena Rodriguez. She knew that voice, had heard it in briefings at Langley, seen the file photos of the decorated Air Force veteran who'd transitioned to commercial aviation 3 years ago. More importantly, she knew Rodriguez's security clearance level and her connection to Operation Nightingale, the counterintelligence network that Maya had helped establish in 2019. The businessman beside her, Frank Morrison, according to the boarding pass tucked into his seat pocket, gripped the armrest with white knuckles. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tremor in his hands or the way his eyes darted toward the emergency exits. Maya had made a habit of memorizing fellow passengers on every flight, another remnant of her training. Morrison worked for Meridian Defense Contractors, had a wife named Sandra and twin daughters, and had been sweating profusely since boarding, despite the cabin's cool temperature. On her other side, the college student, Zoe Martinez, art history major at Boulder, had gone pale beneath her bright purple hair. She clutched a sketchbook filled with pencil drawings of buildings and faces, her artistic eye perhaps too sharp for comfort. Maya had noticed Zoe sketching other passengers during the flight, capturing details with unsettling accuracy. "The weather radar is showing improvement ahead," Captain Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying that particular cadence Maya recognized from crisis management training. "We should have you on the ground safely within the next 45 minutes. But Maya heard something else in that announcement, a slight emphasis on certain words, a rhythm that matched the coded communication protocols they'd used during the Prague incident in 2022. Her pulse quickened. Rodriguez wasn't just managing a weather emergency. She was sending a message. The plane's lights flickered, and for a moment, the cabin plunged into an eerie amber glow. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across faces Maya had been cataloging for the past 3 hours. The elderly woman in 32A who'd been reading a thick biography of Winston Churchill. The tech executive in 35C who hadn't looked up from his laptop since takeoff. The mother and toddler in 33D who'd been sharing animal crackers and quiet giggles. All of them oblivious to the fact that they were flying with someone who'd spent the last decade and a half protecting people they'd never meet from threats they'd never know existed. Maya's secure phone, disguised as an ordinary smartphone, vibrated against her hip with a specific pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse code, but not the kind that meant shipwreck or natural disaster. This was the signal she'd been dreading for 18 months, ever since she'd requested reassignment from active duty to analysis work. The signal that meant her cover was blown and her past was about to collide with her present in spectacular fashion. She glanced around the cabin again, this time with the trained eye of someone who'd survived by noticing what others missed. Morrison's sweating had intensified, and he kept checking his watch, Not the expensive Rolex on his wrist, but a second timepiece, digital and utilitarian, half hidden beneath his sleeve. Zoe had stopped sketching and was instead staring intently at the flight attendants, her artist's eye tracking their movements with suspicious precision. The flight attendants themselves were exhibiting subtle signs of stress beyond what the turbulence would warrant. Sarah Kim, the senior attendant Maya had spoken with when boarding, kept touching the small pin on her lapel, not nervously, but in a pattern. 3 touches, pause, 2 touches, pause, 3 touches. The same SOS signal humming in Maya's pocket. Lightning illuminated the cabin again, and in that brief, electric moment, Maya saw her reflection in the window transformed. For just an instant, she wasn't the anonymous passenger in 34F. She was Agent Phoenix, the woman who'd prevented 3 international incidents, who'd walked into hostile territory with nothing but her wits and a fake passport, who'd earned the respect of colleagues who knew her only by her code name. The woman who'd sacrificed everything: career advancement, stable relationships, the possibility of a normal life, to serve a country that would never acknowledge her existence. The turbulence suddenly smoothed, leaving the cabin in an almost unnatural calm. Captain Rodriguez's voice returned, but this time Maya heard the words behind the words. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Denver. Local time is 3:47 p.m. and the weather on the ground is clearing. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing sequence Protocol 7. Protocol 7, Maya's blood ran cold. That wasn't a standard aviation protocol. It was a Secret Service emergency code, used when a protected asset was in immediate danger and standard procedures had been compromised, which meant someone on this plane knew exactly who she was, and more importantly, someone wanted to make sure everyone else found out. She closed her journal and slipped it into her carry-on bag, her movements casual despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 15 years of training had taught her to never let them see you sweat, never let them know you know, and never assume that today would be the day you gotta stay anonymous. Around her, passengers were beginning to relax as the plane stabilized. The businessman loosened his tie. The college student returned to her sketching. The mother sang softly to her toddler. Normal people doing normal things, unaware that their unremarkable Tuesday afternoon flight was about to become something else entirely. Maya had spent 5 years in the field before requesting a transfer to analytical work, telling herself she was tired of the constant vigilance, the isolation, the weight of secrets that grew heavier with each passing year. She'd taken the job with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division, a cover so mundane that even she sometimes forgot it was fake. For 3 years, she'd lived in a small apartment in Arlington, had dated a kind but incurious accountant named David, had even adopted a cat named Pixel who judged her erratic schedule with feline disapproval. It had been the closest thing to normal she'd ever known. But normal, she was beginning to realize, had always been temporary. The skills never faded. The instincts never dulled. And the enemies never forgot. As the plane descended through the storm clouds toward Denver, Maya found herself wondering not if her cover would be blown, but how, and what it would cost the innocent people around her when it happened. Because in her experience, the moment you stopped being nobody was usually the moment everybody else became collateral damage. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on, and Maya tightened her belt with practiced efficiency. Outside her window, the lights of Denver spread below like a circuit board, orderly and bright. Beautiful even. The kind of view that might make someone forget, just for a moment, that the world was full of people who would kill for information, power, or simple revenge. But Maya Chen, Agent Phoenix, had never been able to afford the luxury of forgetting. The wheels touched down at Denver International with barely a bump, Captain Rodriguez's skill evident in the smooth landing despite the storm they'd flown through. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Maya allowed herself a moment to study the terminal through her window. DEEN was a fortress disguised as an airport, all flowing curves and white peaks designed to evoke the Rocky Mountains. But she saw it differently. The sightlines, the bottlenecks, the places where someone could disappear or where someone could be cornered. "Thank you for flying with us today," came the standard announcement, but Maya noticed Sarah Kim's eyes scanning the cabin with more than professional courtesy. The flight attendant's gaze lingered on certain passengers: Morrison, who was already standing despite the plane still moving; Zoe, who was sketching with renewed intensity; and finally, inevitably, on Maya herself. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for Maya to see recognition flicker there and for Sarah to offer the subtlest of nods. Confirmation of what Maya had already suspected. This wasn't random turbulence, and this wasn't coincidence. Maya had learned to read people the way others read books, quickly, thoroughly, and with attention to subtext. It was a skill that had kept her alive in Moscow when her handler had been compromised, in Dubai when an arms dealer had suspected her real identity, in countless hotel rooms and embassy functions where one wrong word could mean death or worse. But it was also a skill that made normal life nearly impossible. 3 years ago, she'd sat across from Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the Secret Service's staff psychologist, in a sterile office in downtown D.C. "You've given 15 years to this work, Maya," Dr. Hendricks had said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone paid to care. "Don't you think it's time you gave something to yourself?" Maya had stared at the diplomas on the wall, the carefully placed tissues on the coffee table, the bookshelf filled with titles about trauma and resilience and moving forward. "I don't know how to be anyone else," she'd admitted. "That's why we have cover identities for retirement transition," Dr. Hendricks had explained. "You become Maya Chen, financial analyst. You learn to exist without looking over your shoulder. You discover what it means to be ordinary." Ordinary. The word had sounded foreign in her mouth, like trying to speak a language she'd never learned. But the alternative was burning out completely, joining the ranks of former agents who'd lost themselves so thoroughly in the work that they'd forgotten there was supposed to be a person underneath the cover. So she'd become Maya Chen. She'd rented the apartment in Arlington, learned to grocery shop without checking for surveillance, forced herself to sleep through the night without a weapon within arm's reach. She'd even kept a small cactus on her kitchen windowsill, something alive that depended on her, but wouldn't die if she forgot to water it for a week. The apartment was supposed to be temporary, just until she figured out what came next. But months had turned into years, and Maya had found herself settling into a routine that felt almost like contentment. Morning runs along the Potomac, coffee at the same cafe where the barista knew her order, weekend trips to museums where she could stand in front of paintings and not worry about memorizing faces or exit strategies. She'd even dated David for 8 months, something that would have been impossible during her active years. David Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname that had made their first meeting awkward, was everything she'd never allowed herself to want. Stable, kind, blissfully unaware that the woman he took to dinner every Thursday had once killed a man with a salad fork in a Bangkok restaurant. "You're like a mystery novel," David had told her once, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder in the soft light of his bedroom. "I keep reading, but I never feel like I'm getting to the real story." He'd meant it as a compliment, but Maya had felt it like a knife between her ribs. Because the real story was classified at levels that didn't officially exist, and the woman he thought he was falling in love with was herself a kind of fiction. The plane jerked to a stop at the gate, jolting Maya back to the present. Around her, passengers were standing, retrieving luggage, chatting about connecting flights and ground transportation. The ordinary chaos of travel that she'd learned to blend into so completely that sometimes she forgot she was performing. But as she reached for her carry-on bag, she felt Morrison's eyes on her. When she turned, he was looking directly at her, no longer the nervous businessman she'd cataloged during takeoff. His gaze was steady, professional, and entirely too knowing. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there before. "Aren't you?" "Nobody," Maya said quickly, cutting him off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just somebody trying to get home." Morrison studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Of course," he said, "my mistake." But it wasn't a mistake, and they both knew it. Maya could feel the carefully constructed walls of her civilian life beginning to crack. 3 years of ordinary mornings and predictable evenings, 3 years of learning to be someone who didn't need to know how to disable a man twice her size, or speak 6 languages or disappear completely in under 4 hours. 3 years of being nobody, about to end. As the passengers began to deplane, Maya found herself caught in a queue behind the mother and toddler from 33D. The little girl, maybe 2 years old, with dark curls and enormous brown eyes, had been fussing during landing, but now she turned in her mother's arms and smiled at Maya with the uncomplicated joy that only children possessed. "Hi," the girl said, reaching out with pudgy fingers. "Hi there," Maya replied, allowing the child to grab her finger. The touch was warm, trusting, innocent, in a way that made Maya's chest tighten with something she couldn't name. "Say bye-bye," the mother encouraged, and the toddler waved enthusiastically as they moved down the aisle. Maya waved back, watching them disappear into the crowd of passengers, and felt the weight of all the small moments she'd missed while living someone else's life. Children she'd never had because pregnancy would have compromised missions. Friendships she'd never maintained because trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The simple pleasure of being known by someone who loved her exactly as she was, instead of who she pretended to be. The line moved forward, and Maya found herself stepping off the plane into the controlled chaos of DN's Concourse B. The terminal smelled like coffee and cleaning solution, and the particular brand of exhaustion that lived in airports. Travelers rushed past pulling wheeled suitcases, their faces lit by phone screens and departure boards. Normal people living normal lives, and for 3 years, Maya had almost convinced herself she could be one of them. Her phone buzzed again, not the emergency signal this time, but a text from David. "How was your flight? Want to grab dinner when you get back tomorrow?" Sweet, predictable David, who thought she'd been in Phoenix for a Treasury Department conference. David, who had no idea that she'd actually spent the last 4 days in a secure facility in Virginia, undergoing the routine psychological evaluations that the service required of all retired agents. David, who would never understand that the woman he was falling in love with was both more and less than he imagined. Maya typed back, "Flight was eventful. We'll call you later." But even as she sent the message, she knew there might not be a later. Not for David, not for her quiet apartment, not for the carefully ordinary life she'd built like a house of cards in a hurricane. She was scanning the terminal for signs of surveillance when she heard it, her name crackling over the airport's public address system. "Would passenger Maya Chen please report to the nearest customer service desk? Maya Chen to customer service." The announcement echoed through the concourse, and Maya felt every eye in the vicinity turn toward her. A few passengers from her flight looked up from their phones, recognition dawning. Morrison was nowhere to be seen, but she could feel his presence like a weight between her shoulder blades. She had a choice. She could ignore the announcement, blend into the crowd, disappear the way she'd been trained to disappear, find the nearest restroom, change her appearance, purchase a ticket on the next flight to anywhere, and vanish into the ghost network that protected people like her. Or she could walk to that customer service desk and find out who wanted her found, and why. Maya Chen, financial analyst, would have panicked. Would have called David, called her supervisor at Treasury. Would have done what normal people do when their ordinary world suddenly becomes threatening. But Agent Phoenix had never been normal, and the part of her that had been dormant for 3 years was waking up, stretching like a cat in sunlight, remembering what it felt like to be dangerous. She walked to the customer service desk. The customer service desk was staffed by a young man whose name tag read Kevin and whose nervous energy practically radiated from behind the counter. He looked up as Maya approached, his eyes darting quickly to something beneath his workstation before meeting her gaze. "Maya Chen?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "That's me," Maya replied, keeping her voice light and curious. "You paged me?" Kevin's fingers trembled slightly as he reached under the counter and produced a sealed envelope. "Someone asked me to give this to you," he said. "They said it was urgent." Maya took the envelope, noting the weight of it, the quality of the paper, the absence of any identifying marks except her name written in block letters. Professional, anonymous, and entirely too familiar. "Who gave this to you?" she asked. Kevin glanced around nervously. They said you'd understand once you read it, and they said to tell you that Nightingale sends her regards." The bottom dropped out of Maya's world. Nightingale had been her mentor, her handler, and for 7 years the closest thing to family she'd had. Director Sarah Elizabeth Nightingale, whose real name was classified so deeply that Maya suspected even Nightingale herself sometimes forgot it. The woman who'd recruited Maya from MIT's computer science program when she was 22 and brilliant and stupid enough to think she could change the world. Nightingale had been dead for 18 months. Maya's fingers stayed steady as she opened the envelope, but her mind was racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in downtown Denver and a time, 6 p.m. Below that, Written in Nightingale's distinctive handwriting, which should have been impossible, were 4 words that made Maya's blood run cold. Phoenix needs to fly. It was the activation phrase Nightingale had created specifically for Maya back when she was still green enough to think that spy work was glamorous instead of soul-crushing. The phrase that meant everything she thought she knew was wrong, and everything she'd tried to leave behind was about to drag her back in. Maya looked up from the paper to find Kevin watching her with an expression that was no longer nervous but calculating. In that moment, she realized her first mistake, assuming he was what he appeared to be. The trembling hands, the nervous energy, the ordinary appearance of a minimum-wage airport employee. All of it performance, and she'd fallen for it because she'd been out of the game long enough to get sloppy. "You can go now," Kevin said quietly, and his voice carried an authority that definitely didn't come with the customer service training manual. Maya nodded and walked away, her mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had kept her alive through a decade and a half of hostile territory. The terminal around her transformed from a mundane travel hub into a chessboard, every person a potential player, every sightline a potential threat or escape route. She found a coffee shop with good visibility and bought a latte she didn't want, choosing a table that put her back to the wall and her eyes on the flow of foot traffic. The address on the paper was for a building in Lodo, Denver's lower downtown district. She pulled up a map on her phone, studying the location, the surrounding streets, the proximity to police stations and hospitals and other places that might be useful if things went badly. Because things always went badly. Her phone rang, and David's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, Maya stared at it, remembering lazy Sunday mornings in his bed, the way he hummed off-key while making pancakes, the gentle pressure of his hand in hers when they walked through the farmer's market in Arlington. A life that had felt real even though it was built on lies. She declined the call. Instead, she opened the encrypted messaging app that she'd promised herself she'd never use again and typed in a number she'd memorized but never called. The response came back within seconds. "Phoenix, we've been expecting you." Maya's hands didn't shake as she typed back, "Nightingale is dead. Not all birds stay buried." The cryptic response was classic intelligence speak, designed to convey information while revealing nothing to potential interceptors. But Maya had been fluent in this language long enough to read between the lines. Someone was using Nightingale's identity, her codes, her personal knowledge of Maya's psychological triggers, which meant either Nightingale had somehow survived her death, unlikely, or someone had access to files that should have been destroyed when she died. A new message appeared. "Building has 3 exits. Use the service entrance on Blake Street. Come alone. Come armed." Maya closed the app and took a sip of coffee that tasted like cardboard and regret. Around her, travelers continued their ordinary journeys, worried about delayed flights and lost luggage, and whether they'd make their connections. She envied them their simple problems. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. "The accountant is cute. It would be a shame if something happened to him." Maya's blood turned to ice water. They knew about David. Worse, they were threatening him. Which meant this wasn't just about bringing her back in. This was personal, and personal meant messy, and messy meant people she cared about were going to get hurt. She stood up, leaving the untouched latte on the table, and walked to the nearest restroom. Inside a locked stall, she opened her carry-on bag and felt along the lining for the hidden compartment she'd sewn in during her paranoid first year of retirement. Her fingers found the familiar weight of the Sig Sauer P238, unloaded but still reassuring in its compact deadliness. The ammunition was hidden in a different compartment, disguised as a makeup compact that would pass casual inspection but wouldn't fool anyone who knew what to look for. Maya loaded the weapon with practiced efficiency, engaged the safety, and slipped it into the concealed holster built into her waistband. The movements were automatic, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. Looking at herself in the bathroom mirror, Maya saw the transformation happening in real time. The soft edges that 3 years of civilian life had given her were hardening. The alert watchfulness of Agent Phoenix replacing the carefully cultivated casualness of Maya Chen, financial analyst. Her posture straightened, her gaze sharpened, and the woman looking back at her was someone who could kill you with a hairpin if necessary. She almost missed the other woman. The figure at the far sink was washing her hands with the methodical thoroughness of someone stalling for time, her face partially obscured by long blonde hair. But Maya caught her reflection in the mirror and felt another piece of her world shift into place. Agent Iris Volkov, former Spetsnaz, former FSB, former enemy. Maya had last seen her in Prague, tied to a chair in a safehouse basement while Maya extracted intelligence about Russian sleeper cells operating in Western Europe. That had been 2 years ago, and Volkov was supposed to be serving a 20-year sentence in a facility that didn't officially exist. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Volkov smiled, the same cold, calculating expression Maya remembered from their previous encounters. "Hello, Phoenix," Volkov said in her accented English, not bothering to turn around. "Retirement has made you soft." Maya's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon, but stopped when she saw Volkov's stance. Relaxed, hands visible, no immediate threat, yet. "Iris," Maya replied, keeping her voice level, "I thought you were enjoying the hospitality of the U.S. prison system." "Arrangements were made," Volkov said with a shrug. "Debts were called in, and now I find myself with an interesting proposition for you." "I'm not interested in propositions from dead women." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong." Volkov finally turned to face her, and Maya could see the changes that 2 years had wrought. The Russian was thinner, harder, with the look of someone who'd endured things that left invisible scars. "Because I'm not the dead woman you should be worried about." Maya felt the walls closing in, the carefully constructed anonymity of her retirement crumbling like sand. "What do you want?" "The same thing you want," Volkov said, "to find out who's been playing puppet master with both our lives. Who knew enough about Nightingale's codes to forge her handwriting? Who had access to sealed files from operations that never officially happened? And you think I'm going to trust you because—" Volkov reached into her jacket slowly, telegraphing the movement, and produced a photograph. She placed it on the counter between them, and Maya felt her heart stop. It was David. David sitting at their usual Thursday night restaurant, but the timestamp showed it was from 2 days ago, when he should have been at work in Arlington. He was sitting across from someone whose face was obscured by the camera angle, but Maya could see enough to know it wasn't a casual dinner. The body language was all wrong. Tense. Professional. "Your accountant has been very busy," Volkov said softly. "Very busy indeed." Maya stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. David. Sweet, predictable, boring David who made her laugh and brought her coffee in bed and never asked too many questions about her work or her past or the scars she carried on her body and soul. David who apparently wasn't what he seemed. The bathroom door opened, and Maya instinctively positioned herself to keep both the entrance and Volkov in her line of sight. A teenage girl entered, earbuds in, oblivious to the tension crackling between the two women at the sinks. She disappeared into a stall, and Maya heard the click of a lock engaging. "We need to talk," Volkov said quietly. "Somewhere private. There are things you need to know about Nightingale, about your retirement, about why someone wants you active again badly enough to threaten everyone you care about." Maya pocketed the photograph, her mind already working through the implications. If David was compromised, then her entire civilian life was compromised. Her apartment, her job, her routines, all of it potentially monitored, cataloged, used against her. "The address on the paper," Maya said. "Is it a trap?" "Everything is a trap," Volkov replied. "The question is whether it's their trap or ours." The teenager emerged from the stall, washed her hands quickly, and left without making eye contact. Maya waited until the door closed behind her before speaking again. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," Volkov said, moving toward the exit, "we both know what happens to people who try to leave this life behind. They don't get to stay retired. They don't get to keep their accountants and their quiet apartments and their normal lives. They get activated again, or they get eliminated. And right now, Phoenix, you're running out of options." The Russian paused at the door, her hand on the handle. 6 o'clock, Blake Street entrance. "Come alone, but not unarmed." "And Maya?" She used the civilian name deliberately, mockingly. "Say goodbye to Maya Chen. She was never real anyway, and after tonight, she'll be officially dead." Volkov left, and Maya was alone with her reflection and the weight of everything she'd tried to leave behind. Outside the bathroom, the airport continued its mundane business. travelers and workers and families going about their ordinary lives. Inside, Agent Phoenix was waking up from a 3-year hibernation, stretching muscles she'd forgotten she had, remembering skills she'd tried to forget. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. "Haven't heard back from you, everything okay?" Maya stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "Everything's fine, just tired, talk tomorrow." But she knew there wouldn't be a tomorrow. Not for Maya Chen, and maybe not for anyone else either. The clock above the sink read 4:47 p.m. 1 hour and 13 minutes, until she walked into whatever was waiting for her in Lodo. 1 hour and 13 minutes to say goodbye to the woman she'd tried to become, and hello to the woman she'd never stopped being. Agent Phoenix was back in the field, whether she wanted to be or not. The Blake Street service entrance was exactly what Maya expected. Unmarked, unremarkable, and undoubtedly monitored by people who knew how to stay invisible. She'd spent the last hour conducting counter-surveillance, using every technique Nightingale had taught her to identify potential watchers. The results were both reassuring and terrifying. Either the opposition was clean enough to evade her detection, or they were confident enough not to bother hiding. Neither option boded well for her life expectancy. Maya checked her weapon one final time, ensuring the safety was off and a round was chambered. The familiar weight of the Sig Sauer pressed against her ribs like an old friend she'd hoped never to see again. 3 years of trying to forget how easily she could kill someone. 3 years of pretending her hands weren't weapons. 3 years of Maya Chen learning to be soft. All of it stripped away in the space of a single afternoon. The building was a converted warehouse, red brick and industrial steel windows that belonged to Denver's gold rush era but had been retrofitted with modern security systems. Maya could see the cameras, count the obvious ones and estimate the hidden ones, identify the killing fields and escape routes. The analytical part of her mind cataloged everything automatically, while another part, the part that had loved David's terrible cooking and Pixel's judgmental purring, mourned for the simplicities she was losing. She entered through the service door, which opened at her touch. Unlocked, which meant either sloppy tradecraft or supreme confidence. The hallway beyond was lit by industrial fixtures that cast harsh shadows and created blind spots any competent operative would know to avoid. Maya avoided them anyway. The elevator at the end of the hall stood open, its brass doors polished to mirror brightness. Inside, only one button was illuminated, the 8th floor. Maya took the stairs instead, climbing with the silent efficiency that came from years of practice. Every step was controlled, every breath measured. By the time she reached the 7th floor, her heartbeat had settled into the steady rhythm that preceded action. The 8th floor hallway was empty except for a single door marked with a number that corresponded to nothing in the building directory. Maya approached it with her weapon drawn, using the techniques she'd learned in a dozen hostile environments. Check the corners, watch for tripwires, never assume the obvious entrance is the only one. The door opened before she could knock. "Agent Phoenix," said a voice she recognized but couldn't immediately place. "Please, come in. We have so much to discuss." The voice belonged to Deputy Director Marcus Webb, former head of counterintelligence at the Central Intelligence Agency, and current person who should have been testifying before Congress about illegal surveillance programs instead of hosting clandestine meetings in Denver warehouses. Maya had worked 3 operations under Webb's oversight, each one ending with more questions than answers and a higher body count than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Webb was supposed to be dead. Car accident in the Virginia countryside 6 months ago, closed casket funeral, flag-draped coffin, the works. "Marcus," Maya said, not lowering her weapon as she entered the room. "You're looking remarkably healthy for a dead man." The space was elegantly appointed in a way that suggested serious money and serious connections. Leather furniture, original art. A bar cart that probably cost more than Maya's annual salary at Treasury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Denver, all glass and steel reaching toward the Rocky Mountains. It looked like a corporate boardroom, which Maya supposed it was, in its way. Webb poured himself a scotch with hands that didn't shake, despite the fact that he was facing a woman who could put 3 rounds center mass before he finished lifting the glass to his lips. He was older than she remembered, gray at the temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But his posture was straight, his gaze steady, and his expensive suit couldn't quite hide the shoulder holster he wore like a second skin. "Death is remarkably liberating," Webb said, raising his glass in a mock toast. No more congressional oversight. No more media scrutiny. No more pretending that the work we do can be explained to people who've never had to make the hard choices. The work you do, Maya corrected. I retired. Did you? Webb gestured toward a chair that would put her back to the windows. Maya remained standing. Because from where I sit, it looks like you never left. 3 years of playing house with your accountant. 3 years of pretending to be somebody's normal girlfriend. 3 years of lying to yourself about what you really are. Maya felt the familiar cold settling over her, the emotional numbness that had gotten her through Moscow and Dubai and Prague. What do you want, Marcus? I want to give you a choice, Webb said. The same choice I gave Nightingale before she decided to develop a conscience. The mention of her former handler made Maya's grip tighten on her weapon. Sarah Nightingale died in a car accident. Single vehicle, black ice on Route 7, no survivors. Sarah Nightingale died because she tried to expose Operation Lazarus, Webb replied calmly. She discovered what we'd been doing with retired assets, how we'd been monitoring their new lives, how we'd been maintaining them for potential reactivation. The pieces began falling into place in Maya's mind, each revelation worse than the last. You've been watching us. Watching, managing, occasionally nudging when necessary. Webb took a sip of his scotch, savoring both the alcohol and Maya's growing understanding. Did you really think it was coincidence that your apartment in Arlington was in a building owned by a shell company? That your job at Treasury came with such minimal background checks? That David Chen, CPA, moved to D.C. exactly 3 months after you did? Maya felt the world tilt beneath her feet. David. Sweet, predictable David who'd asked her out at the coffee shop where she'd been going every morning for 2 months. David who'd never pushed when she deflected questions about her past, who'd accepted her weird hours and inexplicable skills, and the way she sometimes woke up reaching for weapons that weren't there. David who'd apparently been assigned to her like a case file. He doesn't know, Webb continued, reading her expression with the skill of someone who'd made a career of psychological manipulation. The accountant thinks he fell in love organically. We're very good at creating circumstances that feel natural. The right coffee shop, the right apartment building, the right lonely hearts who just happened to be compatible. Maya's weapon remained steady, but inside she was fragmenting. 3 years of thinking she'd found something real, something that belonged to her instead of the service. 3 years of believing that Maya Chen could exist independently of Agent Phoenix. 3 years of the most elaborate lie she'd ever been told. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because retired assets are still assets, Webb replied. You can't just let someone with your skills and knowledge disappear into suburbia. Too dangerous, too wasteful. So we create controlled environments. We monitor, we maintain, we keep you sharp enough to be useful but comfortable enough not to ask questions. The door opened behind Maya, and she spun to see Iris Volkov entering with her hands visible but her posture ready for violence. The Russian looked around the room with professional interest, noting the exit points and potential weapons the same way Maya had. Ah, Agent Volkov, Webb said with false warmth. Right on time. The Phoenix was easier to track than expected, Volkov replied in her accented English. Retirement has made her predictable. Maya kept her weapon trained on Webb, but shifted her position to maintain sightlines on both potential threats. Let me guess. You two are working together now. Temporarily, Volkov said. I have my own reasons for wanting Lazarus shut down. Webb laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse's exposed brick walls. Oh, Iris, still playing the long game, I see. Still pretending you're anything more than a tool. Maya caught the flash of anger in Volkov's eyes, quickly suppressed, but unmistakably there. Whatever relationship existed between the Russian and Webb, it wasn't as cooperative as it appeared. Tell her about the others, Volkov said coldly. Webb's expression darkened. That's not necessary. Tell her about Agent Raven, about Agent Hawk, about all the retired assets who tried to leave the life behind. Maya felt ice forming in her veins. She'd known Raven, Patricia Mills, cover identity as a freelance photographer in Seattle. They'd worked together in Eastern Europe, saved each other's lives twice, shared the kind of trust that only came from bleeding together in hostile territory. Patricia had retired 2 years before Maya, citing burnout and a desire to do something meaningful with her life. Patricia died in a climbing accident in the Cascades, Maya said. Equipment failure. Patricia died because she discovered her boyfriend was an asset, Webb replied matter-of-factly. She started asking questions, started investigating her own life. We couldn't allow that kind of curiosity to spread. The room went very quiet. Maya could hear her own heartbeat. The distant hum of traffic from Blake Street. The whisper of her own breath. She thought about Patricia's laugh, her terrible jokes, the way she'd cry over movies with sad endings. All of it real, all of it human, all of it snuffed out because she'd wanted to know the truth about her own existence. How many? Maya asked. 7 over the past 3 years, Webb said. All unfortunate accidents, all preventable if they'd simply accepted the lives we'd given them. Maya's finger moved to the trigger, and Webb must have seen the shift in her posture because he raised his hand slightly, the Scotch glass still clutched in his right hand. Now, before you do something permanent, Webb said quickly, you should know that David is currently having dinner at Romano's on Wisconsin Avenue. Table 12, by the window. 1 phone call from me, and he'll have a very different kind of evening than he's expecting. You son of a bitch. I'm a pragmatist, Webb corrected, and right now, I'm offering you the same choice I offered the others. Accept the situation, enjoy your comfortable life with your unwitting boyfriend, and occasionally do some consulting work when we need your particular skills. Or, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Maya could see the alternatives spelled out in Patricia's climbing accident, in the other 5 retired assets who'd chosen curiosity over comfort. What kind of consulting work? She asked, hating herself for asking but needing to understand the full scope of what they wanted from her. Nothing too demanding, Webb said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Wet work, mostly. The kind of jobs that require deniability and a light touch. Politicians who've outlived their usefulness. Journalists who've discovered things they shouldn't know. Whistleblowers who think the public has a right to the truth. Maya felt something break inside her chest, some last vestige of hope that the world might be a place where good people could do good work and go home to normal lives. The service she'd joined at 22 had been about protecting America from genuine threats, stopping real villains, making the world safer for people like David and his earnest belief in the goodness of ordinary life. This wasn't that service. This was something else entirely, something that fed on its own people and called it patriotism. I have a counterproposal, Maya said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her soul. Webb raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. You release David, you shut down Lazarus, you leave the remaining retired assets alone. And in exchange, I don't put 3 bullets in your chest and disappear so completely that not even you will be able to find me. Webb laughed again, but this time there was genuine amusement in it. Phoenix, always so direct. But you're forgetting something important. Which is? You're not the only player in this game. The windows behind Maya exploded inward in a shower of glass and repelling cord. 3 figures dressed in tactical black dropped into the room with military precision, weapons trained on Maya before their boots hit the floor. She recognized the gear, the movement patterns, the coordinated deployment. Special Activities Division, the CIA's paramilitary arm. Maya spun toward the new threats, but Volkov was already moving, producing a pistol from somewhere in her jacket and putting 2 rounds into the nearest operative before he could acquire his target. The man dropped, blood spreading across the polished concrete floor. Maya dove behind Webb's expensive leather couch as automatic weapons fire erupted around her. Bullets chewed through upholstery and artwork, turning the elegant meeting space into a war zone. She could hear Webb shouting orders, Volkov returning fire, the sharp crack of tactical communications over radio. This was what she'd spent 3 years trying to escape. This was what Maya Chen could never be allowed to exist alongside. Maya rolled from cover and put a double tap into the second operative's center mass, her muscle memory taking over where conscious thought might have hesitated. The man fell, his weapon clattering across the floor. The third operative was moving toward Volkov's position, but Maya had the angle now. 1 shot, clean kill. Professional work. The silence that followed was deafening. Webb was pressed against the far wall, his expensive suit torn and bloody from flying glass, his Scotch glass shattered at his feet. Volkov crouched behind an overturned table, her weapon trained on the deputy director. Well? Webb said, straightening his tie with hands that now shook slightly. That was invigorating. Maya kept her weapon trained on him as she moved to check the bodies. All 3 operatives were dead, their tactical gear identifying them as sad assets, with the kind of experience that should have made this engagement impossible to survive. But Maya and Volkov had survived, which meant either they were better than expected or this had been designed to look like a trap while serving some other purpose. "Why sad?" Maya asked. "If you wanted me dead, there are quieter ways." "Oh, I don't want you dead," Webb said with a smile that was all teeth and malice. "I want you fully activated." Nothing motivates an asset like the knowledge that their handlers are willing to kill them. Nothing strips away pretense like a life-or-death situation. "Welcome back to the field, Agent Phoenix." Maya realized with sick certainty that everything, the meeting, the threats, even the assault, had been designed to transform her back into the weapon she'd tried to stop being. Webb hadn't wanted compliance. He'd wanted activation. And he'd gotten it. Outside the shattered windows, Denver sparkled in the gathering dusk, all ordinary lights and ordinary lives. Inside the warehouse, Agent Phoenix stood among the bodies of men she'd killed with the same professional efficiency she'd once brought to protecting American interests. The worst part was how easy it had been, how natural it felt to have blood on her hands again. "Now," Webb said, producing his phone, "shall we discuss your new assignment? Or would you prefer I make that call to Romano's?" Maya stared at Webb's phone, its screen glowing with David's contact information, and felt the last threads of her civilian identity dissolving like sugar in acid. Around her, the warehouse reeked of cordite and death, the bodies of 3 highly trained operatives serving as punctuation marks in a conversation about the price of resistance. But instead of the compliance Webb expected, Maya felt something else rising in her chest. Not the cold professionalism of Agent Phoenix, not the desperate fear of Maya Chen, but something harder and more dangerous than either. Rage. Pure, crystalline fury at the people who'd stolen 3 years of her life and called it kindness. "Make the call," she said quietly. Webb's finger hovered over the screen. "I don't think you understand the situation, Phoenix." "I understand it perfectly." Maya's voice carried the kind of calm that experienced operators recognized as a warning. "You want me to believe that David is just another asset, another lie, in a life built on lies. You want me to think that everything I've tried to build is meaningless because you control it." "It is meaningless," Webb said with the certainty of someone who'd never been wrong about human nature. "It's all performance, Phoenix. The accountant, the apartment, the quiet little life you've been playing at. None of it was ever real." Maya smiled, and Volkov shifted slightly, recognizing the expression of someone who'd just made a decision that was going to get people killed. "You know what the difference is between you and Nightingale?" Maya asked, taking a step closer to Webb. She understood that the work we do only matters if there's something worth protecting. "You've forgotten that the people we lie to and manipulate and sometimes kill, they're the point. They're why any of this matters." "Sentiment," Webb dismissed. "It'll get you killed." "Maybe," Maya agreed, "but it's what makes me human, and that's something you never were." She moved faster than Webb could track, her hand closing around his wrist and twisting until he dropped the phone. It hit the concrete floor with a satisfying crack, the screen spiderwebbing across David's smiling face. Webb tried to draw his weapon, but Maya was already inside his guard, her elbow finding the pressure point at the base of his neck. He dropped to his knees, gasping, and Maya relieved him of his pistol with professional efficiency. "Iris," Maya said without taking her eyes off Webb, "how long have you been planning this?" Volkov straightened from her defensive position, lowering her weapon slightly. "Planning what?" "This." Maya gestured around the warehouse, at the bodies, at Webb kneeling on the floor. "You didn't come here to warn me. You came here to recruit me." The Russian's smile was sharp as a blade. "Very good, though recruit is perhaps the wrong word. Then what would you call it?" "Partnership," Volkov said. "Webb's operation has been running assets in 12 countries. Retired agents, supposed defectors, people who thought they'd earned the right to normal lives. All of them monitored, all of them controlled, all of them available for activation when needed." Maya felt the scope of it settling over her like a weight. "How many?" 47 confirmed, probably more. Webb laughed from his position on the floor, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. You think you can stop it? You think killing me changes anything? This operation has been running for 8 years. It has oversight from the highest levels. I'm just middle management. Then we'll work our way up the chain, Maya said simply. We? Webb's laughter turned mocking. You're going to trust a former FSB operative? Someone who's killed more Americans than cancer? Maya looked at Volkov, really looked at her for the first time since the bathroom encounter at the airport. The Russian was scarred, physically and psychologically. But there was something in her posture that Maya recognized. The weight of someone who'd carried too many secrets, done too many terrible things in service of causes that turned out to be lies. How did they recruit you? Maya asked. They didn't, Volkov replied. They broke me out of prison and offered me a choice, work for them or watch my sister die in a very public and painful way. Your sister? Dr. Elena Volkova, pediatric surgeon in Moscow, completely innocent of anything except sharing DNA with me. Volkov's voice carried the kind of carefully controlled emotion that came from years of practice. She has 2 children, beautiful little girls who call me Aunt Iris and send me drawings of flowers. Maya understood. It was the same leverage they'd used against her with David, the same psychological pressure that turned human connections into weapons. Love as vulnerability, care as weakness, the very things that made life worth living transformed into tools of control. So, we burn it down, Maya said, all of it. Webb struggled to his feet, his face flushed with anger and something that might have been fear. You have no idea what you're talking about. The intelligence community isn't some Hollywood movie where the good guys win by shooting the bad guys. It's an ecosystem. You destroy one part, 10 others rush in to fill the vacuum. Then we'll destroy those too, Maya replied. With what resources? What support? You're 2 burned assets, with a grudge against the system that created you. You think you can take on the entire intelligence apparatus of the United States government? Maya considered this for a moment, then nodded toward the bodies scattered around the warehouse. We just took on 3 of their best operators and walked away. I'd say we're off to a good start. She turned to Volkov. The files you mentioned, where are they? Secure server in Zurich. Swiss banking privacy laws make it nearly untouchable. Nearly. I may have certain connections in the financial sector. Maya pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. I'm sending everything I know about Lazarus to every investigative journalist, every congressional oversight committee, every inspector general office in Washington. Wide distribution, multiple platforms, impossible to suppress completely. Webb's face went pale. You'll destroy dozens of ongoing operations. You'll get people killed. People are already getting killed, Maya replied. The difference is, now it'll be in the open. Her finger hovered over the send button, and in that moment, Maya thought about David. Sweet, predictable David, who might be an unwitting asset, or might simply be a man who'd fallen in love with a woman who could never tell him the truth about herself. David, who was having dinner at Romano's, completely unaware that his relationship had become a geopolitical chess piece. She thought about the apartment in Arlington, about Pixel, the judgmental cat, about the quiet Sunday mornings and the illusion of normalcy that had sustained her for 3 years. She thought about Patricia Mills, about Agent Raven, about 5 other retired operatives who died because they'd wanted to know the truth about their own lives. Maya hit send. The phone chimed as dozens of messages went out simultaneously, carrying classified information across the digital landscape like seeds on the wind. Some would be intercepted, some would be ignored, but others would take root in the minds of people who still believed that the truth mattered. Webb looked like he was going to be sick. You've just committed treason. I've just committed journalism, Maya corrected. There's a difference. Volkov was already moving toward the exit, her professional instincts recognizing that they had perhaps minutes before the building was surrounded by people with orders to shoot on sight. Where will you go? Webb asked as Maya backed toward the door. Everywhere, Maya replied. We're going to visit every retired asset you've been monitoring. We're going to tell them the truth about their lives. And then we're going to give them the same choice you gave me. And if they choose to stay in their comfortable lies, then they get to stay, Maya said. But they get to choose. That's the difference between you and us, Marcus. We believe in free will. As they reached the door, Volkov paused and looked back at Webb. "Tell your masters something for me." "What's that?" "The Cold War is over. They lost." They left Webb alone with the bodies and the shattered windows and the certain knowledge that his carefully constructed operation was about to become front-page news in newspapers around the world. In the elevator descending to street level, Maya felt the strange lightness that came with burning bridges. No more Maya Chen, financial analyst. No more quiet apartment in Arlington. No more Thursday night dinners with David or weekend trips to museums where she could pretend to be normal. But also no more lies. No more performance. No more pretending that the world was a safe place where good people could live quiet lives without looking over their shoulders. "What now?" Volkov asked as they stepped out into the Denver night. Maya looked up at the warehouse windows, already imagining the chaos that would erupt once Webb made his phone calls. Emergency meetings in secure facilities, damage control briefings, congressional hearings that would accomplish nothing but would at least shine light into corners that had been dark for too long. "Now we disappear," Maya said, "and then we get to work." They walked into the crowd of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Two women who'd just declared war on the most powerful intelligence apparatus in human history. Behind them, the warehouse held its secrets for perhaps another hour before the cavalry arrived. It was, Maya reflected, exactly the kind of impossible odds that Agent Phoenix had been designed to overcome. The only difference was that this time, she was fighting for something that mattered. 6 months later, the coffee shop in Reykjavik served excellent espresso and had the kind of international clientele that made two women speaking in low voices completely unremarkable. Maya sat with her back to the wall. Old habits died hard, while Volkov studied a tablet displaying Swiss banking records that shouldn't have existed. "Zurich confirms the transfer," Volkov said in lightly accented English. $7 million from accounts linked to Lazarus subsidiaries. Should be enough to keep our new friends comfortable while they decide what to do with their freedom. Maya nodded, stirring honey into her coffee with the precise movements of someone who'd learned to make every gesture deliberate. 6 months of running had changed her in ways both subtle and profound. She was leaner now, harder, with a kind of contained energy that came from living on the edge of violence. But there was something else, too. A lightness she hadn't felt since before she'd first killed a man in a Moscow alley 20 years ago. Purpose. The kind that came from fighting for something instead of simply fighting. "How many have we reached?" Maya asked. 31 confirmed contacts. 19 chose extraction. 12 decided to stay in their assigned lives. Volkov's expression was neutral, but Maya caught the slight tightness around her eyes. Even the Russians struggled with the choices people made when given complete information about their circumstances. And the ones who stayed? We monitor them quietly. If they change their minds, if their handlers become aggressive, we intervene. Maya thought about David, who'd been number 4 on their list. She'd watched him from a distance as Volkov had approached him with photographs and documentation, proving that his relationship with Maya Chen had been orchestrated from the beginning. His face had gone through the predictable stages: disbelief, anger, devastation, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance that made Maya's chest ache in ways she hadn't expected. He'd chosen to stay. Kept his job at the accounting firm, kept the Arlington apartment that was probably still under surveillance, kept living the life that had been designed for him. But he'd also started dating again, a librarian named Michelle, who laughed at his terrible jokes and didn't carry invisible scars from decades of government service. Maya was happy for him. Mostly. "Any word from our friends in Washington?" she asked. Volkov's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Congressional hearings start next week. 3 congressional representatives, 1 senator, and the Secretary of Homeland Security have all been implicated in the initial document dump. The FBI has opened investigations into 47 suspicious deaths of former intelligence assets over the past 5 years. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel." And Webb? Officially died in a climbing accident in Colorado. Unofficially was transferred to a facility that doesn't exist, where he's spending his time explaining Lazarus to people with very little patience for creative accounting. Maya felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy for her former handler, then remembered Patricia Mills dying alone on a mountain because she'd wanted to know the truth about her own life. The sympathy didn't last long. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from one of their contacts in the intelligence community, a network of active agents who'd grown disgusted with operations like Lazarus and had begun feeding information to Maya and Volkov's Underground Railroad. "New asset identified," Maya read aloud. "Former Delta Force, cover identity as a high school teacher in Nebraska. Handler getting aggressive about reactivation for Syrian operation. Road trip?" Volkov asked, with the anticipation of someone who'd found her calling in liberating people from invisible prisons. "Road trip," Maya confirmed. They'd developed a system over the months of running operations across 3 continents. Volkov handled the technical aspects, bank accounts, documentation, digital security, while Maya specialized in extraction and protection. It was an unlikely partnership between 2 women who'd spent years trying to kill each other. But it worked because they understood the weight of the choices they'd made and the price of the freedom they were offering others. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Maya's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer it, but something about the timing made her curious. "Phoenix?" she said by way of greeting. "Is that really what you want to be called?" The voice was familiar, warm, slightly nervous, tinged with the kind of carefully controlled emotion that came from making difficult decisions. "David," Maya said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "I know I'm not supposed to contact you. I know it's dangerous for both of us. But I needed you to know something." Maya stepped outside the coffee shop, into the crisp Icelandic air that carried the scent of ocean and possibility. "What?" "I remember everything. Every conversation, every dinner, every morning I woke up next to you. And here's the thing. I don't care if it started as an assignment. I don't care if some government handler put me in your path. What I felt for you was real. What we had together was real." Maya closed her eyes, remembering Sunday mornings in David's apartment, the way he hummed while making pancakes, the gentle pressure of his hand in hers when they walked through the farmer's market. 3 years of the closest thing to normal she'd ever experienced. "David, I'm not asking you to come back," he said quickly. "I know you can't. I know you're doing something important, something that matters more than whatever we had. But I needed you to know that it wasn't all performance. At least not on my end." "It wasn't performance on mine either," Maya said quietly. "That's what made it so hard to leave." There was silence on the line, filled with all the words they couldn't say and all the choices they couldn't unmake. "Be safe," David said finally. "Be happy," Maya replied. The line went dead, and Maya stood in the Reykjavik street feeling both lighter and heavier than she had moments before. Volkov appeared beside her, reading her expression with the skill of someone who'd learned to survive by understanding human nature. "Regrets?" the Russian asked. "No," Maya said, surprised to find it was true. "Gratitude." They walked toward their rental car, 2 women who'd found purpose in dismantling the systems that had created them. Behind them, the coffee shop continued its ordinary business, serving espresso to ordinary people who would never know that 2 of the most wanted fugitives in the intelligence community had just planned their next operation at Table 7. 2 years later, the congressional hearing room was packed with reporters, cameras, and the kind of political theater that Maya had learned to navigate during her years in Washington. She sat at the witness table, wearing a conservative blue suit that made her look like any other government bureaucrat, her hair pulled back in a style that suggested competence without drawing attention. The transformation from fugitive to star witness had taken 18 months of careful negotiation through intermediaries, immunity deals, and the kind of legal maneuvering that turned criminals into patriots depending on which way the political wind was blowing. "Agent Chen," said Congresswoman Patricia Hendricks, no relation to the psychologist who'd once encouraged Maya to retire, "can you tell this committee how many American citizens were affected by Operation Lazarus?" "Based on the documentation we've recovered, at least 87 retired intelligence assets were placed under surveillance and behavioral management," Maya replied in the calm, professional tone she'd perfected for these proceedings. Of those, 23 died under suspicious circumstances when they attempted to investigate their own situations. The committee chairman, a silver-haired representative from Michigan who'd made his career on national security issues, leaned forward with the intensity of someone who'd found a cause worth fighting for. "And the foreign assets? the individuals recruited from other intelligence services. Approximately 43 confirmed cases across 14 countries. Many were coerced through threats to family members or manipulation of their legal status in the United States. Maya's testimony continued for 6 hours, laying out the scope and brutality of an operation that had turned human beings into inventory, managing them like assets on a balance sheet. She spoke with clinical precision about psychological manipulation, about the murders disguised as accidents, about the careful construction of false identities designed to keep people compliant and controllable. She did not mention the safe house in Prague where she and Volkov were currently based, or the network of former operatives they'd built to continue extracting people from similar operations. Some secrets were worth keeping. During a recess, Maya stepped outside the hearing room and found herself face-to-face with Director Sandra Nightingale, Sarah's daughter, who'd followed her mother into the service and was now tasked with cleaning up the mess that people like Webb had created. "Agent Phoenix," Sandra said with a small smile, "or should I say Ms. Chen?" "Maya is fine," Maya replied. "Your mother would be proud of the work you're doing." "She'd be proud of the work you're doing too." Sandra handed her a sealed envelope. "From some mutual friends. I'm told it's time-sensitive." Maya opened the envelope to find a single photograph, a man in his 60s standing next to a car in what looked like suburban Virginia. She recognized him immediately. Deputy Director Harrison Cole, Webb's superior and one of the architects of Lazarus. According to their intelligence, Cole had been transferred to a desk job, pending the congressional investigation. Except the timestamp on the photograph was from yesterday, and Cole was supposed to be under house arrest. "How many more are there?" Maya asked quietly. "Operations like Lazarus? At least 3 that we know of. Probably more." Maya folded the photograph and slipped it into her jacket pocket. "Then I guess our work isn't finished." "Be careful," Sandra said. "The people you're hunting have learned from Webb's mistakes. They won't be as easy to find next time." "Good," Maya replied with a smile that would have made Agent Phoenix proud. "I was getting bored with easy." 5 years later, the small house in Tuscany sat on a hillside overlooking olive groves that had been producing oil for 3 centuries. Maya tended the garden in the early morning light, her hands dark with soil, her face relaxed in a way that would have been unimaginable during her years in the field. But her phone was never more than arm's reach away, and the Sig Sauer was still hidden in the garden shed behind bags of fertilizer that served a dual purpose. Volkov appeared on the terrace with coffee and a tablet displaying the morning's intelligence briefings. "Cole's operation in Singapore was shut down last night," she reported with satisfaction. 14 assets extracted, including 2 who'd been under management for over a decade. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully, her Italian improving but still imperfect after 2 years of living among people who measured time in generations instead of quarters. "Any complications?" "Nothing we couldn't handle, though the local authorities are asking questions about the explosion at the warehouse." "Controlled demolition or enthusiasm?" "A little of both," Volkov admitted with the kind of smile that suggested the enthusiasm had been mostly hers. They sat in comfortable silence watching the sun rise over the valley while reviewing reports from their network of operatives. The organization they'd built had grown beyond what either of them had imagined. Former intelligence assets from a dozen countries, united by the experience of discovering that their retirements had been as fictional as their cover identities. They called themselves the Freedbirds, a name that Maya found simultaneously pretentious and perfect. They operated on donations from grateful ex-assets, intelligence sold to legitimate government agencies, and the occasional heist of accounts belonging to organizations that managed human beings like property. It was, Maya reflected, the closest thing to legitimate government work she'd ever done. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from one of their contacts in Washington. "New director confirmed for the agency. Clean record, reform agenda, wants to meet." Maya showed the message to Volkov, who snorted with the cynicism of someone who'd been betrayed by too many reformers to count. "They always want to meet," the Russian said, "right up until they decide we know too much." "Still," Maya said thoughtfully, "it might be worth hearing what they have to say." "You're thinking of going legitimate again?" Maya considered this, looking out over the peaceful valley where she'd learned to grow tomatoes and speak Italian and sleep through the night without checking the locks twice. It was a good life, built on honest work and genuine relationships with people who knew her as Maya, the American woman who grew excellent vegetables and asked few questions about anyone else's past. But it was also a temporary life, borrowed time between the person she'd been and the person she was becoming. And there were still people out there living in carefully constructed prisons, believing their jailers were their friends. "No," Maya said finally. "But maybe it's time we stopped running from them and started making them run from us." Volkov's smile was sharp with anticipation. "I was hoping you'd say that." 10 years later, the university lecture hall was filled with eager graduate students studying international relations, their faces bright with the kind of idealism that Maya remembered from her own youth. She stood at the podium in professional attire that disguised the scars she carried from a decade of fighting shadows, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in the kind of style that suggested competence earned through experience. Intelligence work, she told her students, is fundamentally about understanding human nature, the desire for security, for meaning, for connection, the fear of isolation, of insignificance, of being forgotten. Every successful operation, whether ethical or not, begins with understanding what people want and what they're afraid to lose. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Professor Chen, is it true that you were a field operative before joining the academic community?" Maya smiled, the expression carrying echoes of all the identities she'd worn and discarded over the years. "I spent 15 years in government service, yes. Much of that work remains classified, but I can tell you that the most important lesson I learned was this. The moment you stop seeing the people in your files as human beings, you've lost the moral authority to make decisions about their lives." Another student, a serious young man with the kind of intensity Maya recognized from her own reflection at that age, leaned forward with interest. "What about the necessity of secrets? National security?" "Secrets are tools," Maya replied. "Like any tool, they can be used to build or to destroy. The question isn't whether secrets are necessary. They are. The question is, who gets to decide what secrets to keep and who pays the price for keeping them?" After the lecture, Maya walked across the campus of Georgetown University, where she'd been teaching for 3 years under her real name for the first time since she was 22. Her office was small but comfortable, filled with books on intelligence history and conflict resolution, photographs of students who'd gone on to careers in diplomacy and journalism and law. A normal life, built on work that mattered, surrounded by people who knew her story and respected the choices she'd made. Her phone buzzed with a text from Volkov, who was currently running a security consulting firm in Prague. "New client wants to discuss employee loyalty programs." "Sounds familiar." Maya typed back, "How familiar?" "Familiar enough to be interesting." "Weekend in Prague?" Maya looked out her office window at the students walking across the quad, backpacks slung over shoulders, deep in conversations about classes and relationships and futures they were still figuring out. Young people who would never know that their ability to have those ordinary conversations had been protected by people who'd given up their own chances at ordinary lives. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to her department head, requesting personal leave for the following week. Some habits, it seemed, died harder than others. 15 years later. The memorial service was held in a small church in Arlington, attended by people who'd known Sarah Nightingale as a neighbor, a friend, a woman who'd volunteered at the local animal shelter and made exceptional apple pie for church fundraisers. They had no idea that they were mourning one of the most effective intelligence handlers in American history, or that the woman giving the eulogy had once been the government's most dangerous weapon. Haig. Maya stood at the podium, looking out at faces that belonged to Sarah's civilian life, the cover identity she'd maintained even in death. But scattered throughout the congregation were other faces, harder ones that Maya recognized from briefings and operations and the kind of work that left invisible scars. "Sarah Elizabeth Harper," Maya said, using the name on the headstone instead of the code name that had defined their relationship, "believed that the work we do in shadows only matters if it protects something worth protecting. She believed that every secret we keep, every lie we tell, every sacrifice we make, has to serve something larger than our own survival." Maya's voice carried clearly through the small church, reaching the retired operatives who'd come to pay their respects and the ordinary citizens who'd known Sarah as the woman who brought casseroles when neighbors were sick and remembered everyone's birthday. "She taught me that the hardest part of intelligence work isn't learning to kill, or to lie, or to disappear when necessary. The hardest part is learning when to stop, when to choose the life you want over the life you've been assigned, when to remember that the person you were before the training and the missions and the secrets still matters." In the third pew, Maya spotted Iris Volkov wearing a simple black dress and a face that looked almost peaceful. Beside her sat director Sandra Nightingale, no longer the young woman desperate to clean up her mother's legacy, but a seasoned professional who'd spent a decade reforming an intelligence community that had forgotten its purpose. And in the back, barely visible but unmistakably present, David Chen sat with his wife Michelle and their 2 children. He caught Maya's eye for just a moment, offering the kind of nod that acknowledged shared history without reopening old wounds. Sarah died as she lived, Maya continued, protecting the people who mattered to her. She died knowing that the work continues, that the next generation understands the weight of the choices they make, and that somewhere in the world, people who thought they were nobody are discovering that they were always somebody worth fighting for. After the service, Maya found herself standing in the cemetery as other mourners drifted away. The headstone was simple granite, with dates that told only a fraction of Sarah's story, but Maya could see the whole of it. The young woman who'd joined the agency to serve her country, the handler who'd guided dozens of operatives through hostile territory, the mentor who'd taught Maya that strength and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. Volkov approached quietly, her footsteps respectful on the grass between graves. She would have been proud, the Russian said. What you've built, what you've become. Maya nodded toward the departing mourners. Look at them, Sarah's neighbors, her friends from the book club, the people she helped at the animal shelter. They knew her better than we did, in some ways. They knew the person she chose to be when she wasn't being who the job required. Is that what you want? Volkov asked. To be known for who you choose to be instead of what you were trained to do? Maya considered this as she watched David loading his family into a minivan, their voices carrying the comfortable chaos of parents dealing with tired children after a long ceremony. It was the life she'd glimpsed during their 3 years together, the ordinary happiness that she'd convinced herself she could never have. I think, Maya said slowly, I want to be known for both. The work matters, Iris. The people we've saved, the operations we've shut down, the choice we've given people to be more than their assignments. That's part of who I am, too. And the other part? Maya smiled, thinking of her students at Georgetown, her small house in Tuscany that she still maintained as a retreat, the garden where she grew vegetables, and the cat who'd replaced Pixel and judged her schedule with equal disdain. The other part is learning to live with the choices I've made instead of being haunted by them. As they walked toward the cemetery parking lot, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from one of their contacts in Eastern Europe. 3 retired assets in Budapest requesting extraction. Handler threatening family members. Urgent. Maya showed the message to Volkov, who sighed with the resignation of someone who understood that some responsibilities never truly end. Weekend in Budapest? Volkov asked. Weekend in Budapest, Maya confirmed. They drove away from the cemetery in comfortable silence, 2 women who'd found purpose in protecting people they'd never meet from threats they'd never fully understand. Behind them, Sarah Nightingale's grave marker stood among hundreds of others, marking the final resting place of someone who'd lived multiple lives in service of ideals that transcended any single identity. 20 years later, the secure conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley buzzed with the controlled tension that came with briefing the President of the United States on intelligence matters that could reshape global security. Maya sat at the mahogany table alongside current agency directors, cabinet members, and advisors whose clearance levels gave them access to the kind of information that could start or prevent wars. At 72, she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd survived longer than most people in her profession had any right to expect. Her hair was white now, pulled back in the kind of severe style that suggested competence earned through decades of experience, and her eyes carried the weight of every choice she'd made and every person she'd saved or failed to save. Madam President, said CIA Director James Harrison, a man young enough to be Maya's son who'd grown up reading about her exploits in classified case studies, Professor Chen has unique insight into the psychological operations we're facing in the Baltic states. President Elizabeth Martinez, formerly Senator Martinez, who'd cut her teeth on intelligence oversight committees that had investigated operations like Lazarus, nodded toward Maya with the respect accorded to legends who'd lived long enough to become institutional memory. Professor Chen, the president said, your assessment? Maya activated the secure tablet in front of her, displaying satellite imagery and psychological profiles that represented months of analysis by teams who'd never worked in the field but understood the theoretical frameworks that governed modern intelligence work. The pattern matches operations I first encountered in Prague 25 years ago, Maya said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen history repeat itself enough times to recognize the early warning signs. Retired assets being reactivated through psychological pressure, family members used as leverage, whole networks of people who thought they'd earned the right to normal lives discovering that their handlers never considered them fully human. She touched the screen, bringing up a network analysis that showed connections between seemingly unrelated incidents across 6 countries. The difference is scale. Where Lazarus managed perhaps 100 assets, this operation appears to be coordinating with over 300 individuals across NATO countries. The Secretary of Defense, a woman Maya's age who'd spent her own career navigating the intersection of military necessity and political reality, leaned forward with concern. "What's the objective?" "Same as it's always been," Maya replied. "Control." The people running this operation understand that retired intelligence assets represent both an opportunity and a threat. "We know too much to be allowed complete freedom, but we're too valuable to simply eliminate. So they create elaborate systems of management disguised as care." "And your recommendation?" Maya looked around the table at faces that represented the current generation of American leadership, people who'd inherited the intelligence apparatus that she'd spent half her life fighting and half her life trying to reform. "Half her way to shut it down," she said simply. "Not just this operation, but the entire concept of managing retired assets. Give people the choice to leave, really leave, and trust that their patriotism and professionalism will keep them from becoming security risks." The National Security Advisor, a career diplomat who'd worked with Maya during the congressional hearings that had led to intelligence community reforms, raised an eyebrow. "That's a significant departure from current policy." "Current policy is what created this mess," Maya replied. "We keep trying to control people instead of trusting them, and we keep being surprised when they resist being controlled." President Martinez studied the intelligence reports with the careful attention of someone who understood that decisions made in rooms like this one rippled outward to affect lives across the globe. "How many assets are we talking about globally?" the president asked. "Conservative estimate, 1,500 people who've been promised retirement, but are still being monitored and managed by intelligence services that consider them property instead of citizens." The room fell silent as the scope of the problem settled over the assembled officials. Maya had learned over the decades that the most powerful moments in briefings came not from dramatic revelations, but from simple statements of fact that forced people to confront the human cost of policies they'd never questioned. "Professor Chen," the president said finally, "if we were to implement your recommendation, how would you suggest we proceed?" Maya smiled, thinking of Volkov running her security firm in Prague, of the network of former operatives who'd found purpose in protecting others who wanted to escape the shadows, of students at Georgetown who'd gone on to careers in diplomacy, built on the radical notion that intelligence work should serve human dignity instead of undermining it. "The same way we've been proceeding for 20 years, she said, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one life at a time." After the briefing, Maya walked through the corridors of CIA headquarters for what she knew would probably be the last time. The building had changed since her early years. More security, more technology, more layers of bureaucracy designed to prevent the kind of operations that had once defined her career. But the essential mission remained the same, protecting American interests while trying to maintain some semblance of moral authority in a world where the line between necessary secrets and convenient lies grew thinner every year. Director Harrison caught up with her at the security checkpoint, his expression carrying the kind of earnestness that Maya remembered from her own youth. "Professor," he said, "I wanted to thank you for the briefing, for your service, for the example you've set." Maya paused in collecting her personal items from the security tray, studying the young man who represented the future of American intelligence. "The example I've set is that it's possible to serve your country without losing your soul. But it's not easy, and it's not something you can do alone. The network you built with Agent Volkov will continue long after we're both gone," Maya finished. "Because it's built on the understanding that intelligence work is ultimately about protecting people's right to make their own choices about their own lives." She walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back to Harrison. "Director, can I give you one piece of advice?" "Of course." "The moment you stop seeing the people in your files as human beings with their own hopes and fears and dreams, you've become the enemy. Remember that, and you might actually make this place better instead of just more efficient. Outside the headquarters building, Maya stood in the Virginia sunshine and breathed air that carried the scent of ordinary American life, car exhaust and coffee, and the promise of spring. Around her, people went about their daily business, unaware that their freedom to do so had been protected by people they'd never meet, who'd made sacrifices they'd never understand. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of her graduate students. "Professor, got the internship at State. Thank you for the recommendation." Maya smiled and typed back, "Congratulations. Remember what we discussed about the difference between serving your country and serving the people who temporarily run it?" As she walked toward her car, Maya felt the weight of 7 decades settling on her shoulders, not as burden, but as completion. The young woman who joined the service to change the world had become the old woman who'd spent her life learning that change happened one person at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. Behind her, the CIA headquarters stood as a monument to American power and American paranoia, housing thousands of people who dedicated their lives to protecting secrets and gathering intelligence, and making the hard choices that democracy required but couldn't acknowledge. Some of them would remember her briefing and make different choices about how they treated the people whose lives they held in their hands. Some would forget and repeat the mistakes that had created operations like Lazarus. And some would find themselves, years from now, faced with the same choice Maya had confronted in that Denver warehouse: serve the system or serve the people the system was supposed to protect. Maya drove away from Langley, knowing that the work would continue, that the next generation would face the same temptations and the same opportunities to choose humanity over efficiency. She'd done her part, built the networks and trained the people and written the books that would carry the lessons forward. The rest was up to them. 25 years later, the nursing home in Arlington was quiet in the way that places of transition always were, filled with people moving between the lives they'd lived and whatever came next. Maya sat in her wheelchair by the window of her private room, watching autumn leaves fall in the courtyard where residents and their families gathered on better days. At 97, she moved slowly but with the dignity of someone who'd never compromised on the things that mattered most. Her mind remained sharp, though her body had finally begun to show the accumulated wear of decades spent in hostile territory and high-stress situations. The young woman sitting across from her was taking notes on a tablet, her questions careful and respectful. Dr. Jennifer Volkov, Iris's niece, who'd grown up hearing stories about her aunt's mysterious American friend and had decided to pursue a doctoral thesis on the ethics of intelligence work. "Professor Chen," Jennifer said in lightly accented English that reminded Maya of her aunt, "when you look back on your career, what do you consider your greatest success?" Maya considered this question, as she'd considered similar ones from dozens of researchers and historians over the years. Her official biography had been declassified 5 years earlier, revealing enough of her story to satisfy academic curiosity, while keeping the most sensitive operations protected. "The people who got to live ordinary lives," she said finally. "The retired assets who were extracted from psychological management programs and given real choices about their futures. The young operatives who learned that strength and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. The policy changes that came from congressional hearings that forced the intelligence community to remember that American citizens, even former intelligence officers, have rights. And your greatest failure?" Maya's expression grew distant, remembering faces from files that would never be declassified, operations that had saved some lives while failing to save others, the weight of choices made in seconds that echoed across decades. "The people I couldn't save," she said quietly, "the assets who died before we could reach them, the operatives who lost themselves so completely in their cover identities that they forgot who they really were, the friends like Patricia Mills who just wanted to know the truth about their own lives." Jennifer made notes with the careful attention of someone who understood that she was recording living history. "Do you have any regrets about leaving active service?" Maya smiled, thinking of David and his quiet happiness with Michelle and their children, of Iris Volkov, who died 3 years earlier in Prague surrounded by the security consultants who'd become her chosen family, of Sarah Nightingale, whose real grave marker now included her intelligence service alongside her civilian achievements. "None," Maya said. "The work I did after retiring was more important than anything I accomplished as an active agent. Teaching students who went on to careers in diplomacy and intelligence with better understanding of the human cost of secrecy, building networks that gave people choices instead of taking them away, learning to live with the choices I'd made instead of being haunted by them. What would you want people to remember about your generation of intelligence officers? Maya looked out the window at the ordinary world beyond the nursing home walls, families visiting loved ones, children playing in the courtyard, the comfortable chaos of people living normal lives because someone had made it possible for them to do so. That we understood the difference between serving our country and serving our egos, she said. That we knew the secrets we kept and the lies we told only mattered if they protected something worth protecting. That we remembered, even in the darkest moments, that the people we were supposed to be protecting were human beings with their own hopes and dreams and rights. Jennifer closed her tablet and sat quietly for a moment, the weight of Maya's story settling around them like autumn light through the window. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the interview, for your service, for the example you set." Maya nodded toward the photograph on her bedside table, a group shot of her Georgetown students from her final semester of teaching, young faces bright with the idealism she remembered from her own youth. "The example I set is that it's possible to serve something larger than yourself without losing yourself completely. But every generation has to learn that lesson for themselves." That evening, after Jennifer had left and the nursing home had settled into its quiet routine, Maya sat in her chair reading messages on her tablet from former students who'd gone on to careers in government service. Updates on policy changes, success stories of operations conducted with respect for human dignity, challenges from new threats that required the same careful balance between security and liberty that had defined her own career. The work continued, carried forward by people who understood that intelligence gathering was ultimately about protecting people's right to make their own choices about their own lives. Maya closed the tablet and prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges for the people who'd inherited the responsibility of keeping America safe while keeping America American. She'd done her part, built the networks and trained the people and written the lessons that would guide them. The rest was up to them, as it had always been. Outside her window, the lights of Arlington sparkled like stars, each one representing a life that continued because someone had chosen to serve something larger than themselves. It was, Maya reflected as sleep took her, exactly the kind of ordinary miracle that made all the secrets and sacrifices worthwhile. In her dreams, she was nobody in the back row again, anonymous and unremarkable, watching the world go by with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd learned that the most important work happened when nobody was watching, when no one knew your name, when your greatest success was measured not in headlines but in the simple fact that people were free to live ordinary lives. Agent Phoenix had finally come home. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.